So my mom thought I had called, and I had not called, so I don't know. But whoever called her, please don't call again. Anyway, we're going to start on page 32 and hopefully finish all these paper clips that I have in here. We'll just have to see how much time and all that stuff. Anyway, back to 32 here. She had, as her grandfather liked to say, all the fun she could stand. Time to vamoose. The waitress had been running a tab, and Melody wanted to pay her share, so she elbowed her way through the cash register at the far end of the bar, searching that little yellow purse, part of the bridesmaid outfit, for her credit card. She settled up and limped toward the door, propped open to the summer breezes, and scanned the demolition derby in the parking lot for her car. It was all blocked in on all sides. Oh, hell, she muttered, faced with two equally unappealing choices: go back inside the Moose Jaw, hunt down the bar owner, and convince him to find the patrons responsible for the dilemma and get them to move their vehicles, or she could walk home. Is there a problem? The voice, all too familiar, took her off guard. She turned her head, and sure enough, Spence was standing there, watching her, his face in a shadow, his expression therefore unreadable. Well, not completely. Was that a grin just barely tugging at one corner of his mouth? Yes, Melody said stiffly, there is a problem. She sucked in a breath and continued in a rush of words. In fact, there are several problems. First of all, I want to go home, and I can't because my car is literally surrounded. Furthermore, my feet are killing me. Melody put on the brakes, stopped talking, and Spence, frowning as he listened, surveyed the lot of full rigs that might have been parked by half-trained baboons inside. She was unprepared for the impact of his blue eyes when he looked back at her face, then slid a leisurely glance down the length of her body to her shoes, which weren't suitable for walking through gravel, let alone making that long hike home. The grin he'd probably been trying to suppress broke loose at last. I don't know how you can stand walking in those things, he remarked, and no offense, but that dress makes you look like an inverted daffodil, a wilted one. I bet it's stylish or something, but I'm not as positive yellow as your color. The good point is that it shows off one leg. I like that. You have nice legs. Melody rolled her eyes and then snapped. Well, thanks, a whole heap for nothing. Just my opinion, Spence said, and I wasn't kidding about the leg part. I don't remember asking for your opinion of my dress, or my shoes, or my legs, she said, more than cranky now. When would this damnable night be over? Spence's response was a low chuckle, and that sound was so thoroughly masculine it made her heart pound. Come to think of it, he drawled, you didn't. He paused, and then in an instant his expression changed. He seemed tired, no longer amused. I'm heading for home myself, and I'd be glad to drop you off at your place. A beat of silence. Your car will be all right here until morning, if that's what you're worried about. By then Melody's heart had shined up into the back of her throat. Shimmied. No, it says shined up into the back of her throat. But she managed to croak out a reply. Anyway, I don't think I wouldn't, Spence's mouth twitched again, and his eyes twinkled as he watched her. Melody wanted to punch him. She also wanted to pervishly kiss him. She wanted to, damn it all to hell, she didn't know what the hell she wanted. Typically, Spence didn't ask. Instead, without any warning at all, he swept Melody up in his arms and proceeded to carry her across the parking lot. His strides were purposeful. What? Melody gasped, after a considerable delay and with significant effort. Are you doing? That ought to be obvious, Spence replied reasonably. I'm hauling you off to my truck so I can drive you home. It's not as if you could cover much ground under your own power, not in those ridiculous shoes anyhow. Hauling me? He nodded matter-of-factly. You look thin enough, but I'd say you're on the hefty side. I've lugged around calves that weighs less. Melody seethed and then stung, even as primitive and hungry unfurled inside her. That was a terrible thing to say, she protested. Hefty? They reached Spence's truck, and he set her on the passenger side running board, holding her in place with one hand. After he extracted his keys from the pocket of his jeans, and after easing her to one side, he opened the door and gestured for her to get in. Sorry, he finally said without conviction. When she didn't move, he just put her in the truck cab. Melody's backside landed hard on the seat, and she was too stunned by his audacity to say another word or to climb right out of the truck. Spence paused to consider passing thought, rubbing his chin as he apparently pondered. His beard was already coming in. Melody noticed, oddly distracted. I guess I can be fairly tactless, he considered. Hefty might be the wrong word, but I did apologize, didn't I? Melody found some remnant of her voice to call him a name. Spence shook his head in apparent amazement, but Melody knew that lethal grin of his was lurking just at the out of sight and might reappear at any moment, a dazzling flash that would leave her temporarily blinded. "I should have known better than to try and do you a favor," he said, with a long-suffering sigh. Before Melody could react, he added a brusque, "Fasten your seat belt." With that, he slammed the door, came around to the driver's side, and got behind the wheel. If she hadn't been fresh out of steam and in no mood to cripple herself for life by walking home in the heels from hell, she would have told Spence Hogan what he could do with his favor. After that, she would have pushed the door open again and left him sitting there in his gas-guzzling, phallic symbol of a truck to think what he liked. It was a nice fantasy. Melody folded her arms and fumed until they were out of the parking lot and on the highway. Then she just couldn't help it, she muttered. "You started it." Spence threw back his head and gave a shout of laughter. "Well, you did," Melody insisted. Why couldn't she just shut up and leave well enough alone? After all, that her house was less than 5 minutes away. Surely she could have held her tongue that long, but no. Grinning, Spence turned to look at her. "What's so funny?" Melody asked. "You," he answered succinctly. "It's really true what they say." "Which is?" "Some things never change. Neither do some people." So you see the banter between the two characters. That's one thing that drew me in. I love this next part. We see the two friends talking, and it's from the male perspective, and he's realizing in his own way, I think, but he's trying to fight that feeling of falling in love and being in love, and yet he wants Melody in his life, but he can't have it both ways. So let's read on page 139. "How to convince Mel that you're the one." "What makes you think," he started to say, then shook his head. "Strike that. I already know what you think, and you aren't off track. I heard her once. She doesn't trust me. All the gossip in this town doesn't help my case either. I'm considered a player, but most of it's undeserved." He briefly rested his axe on the stump and studied his best friend. "You know me, Trip. I'm not a saint or anything. I've slept with a few lovely ladies, but none of them have accounted for much. Melody's always been different. Special. We had an argument, if you can believe this, over how many women I did sleep with, because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. So I said something stupid. 36. Then I told her I was talking about my age. I was. I meant in a sort of convoluted way that I'm old enough, mature enough to act responsible toward any woman I date. And any woman I've ever dated, and it isn't that there's a long list, and I don't put notches in my bedpost or anything like that. Trip heaved up another log and set it into place. "I do know you. That's what this conversation is about. Let's get back to my original question. How's this going to go down? I'll be blunt here and tell you that how exactly my wife sees it all. 9 years ago you had a fling with Mel for a few months. Then you dumped her, and now you want another shot at it. Why should she give you a second chance?" Spence picked up the axe and defended his position, saying flatly, "It wasn't a fling," before the axe came down with a solid chunk and the wood chips flew. I realized that splitting and stacking wood on a summer night was hard work, and Trip evidently decided Spence had the right idea because it took his shirt off and tossed it aside, but it almost took a decade for you to admit it. "That's not true." He swung the next log for his friend put in place. "I've never denied it. Look, we've already had this discussion more than once. Are you going to ask her to marry you?" That was blunt, even for Trip. Spence paused to catch his breath. "I'd answer that, but you can't swear that you wouldn't tell Hadley." "No," he said. "Then this conversation is over." Trip looked irritated, but they'd been friends long enough that he backed off. "Fine," he said gruffly, "but a man can't kiss a girl in a barn one day and walk away the next." "You want me to bring over those extra camp chairs I have in my barn?" Spence pointedly changed the subject. Trip went along with it, stacking more splint wood. "That's a good idea. Mo Radnor might pitch in too. He spends every day off hiking and camping out there, has lots of equipment. The deputy would be more than willing to lend out outdoor furniture for the party. By the way, he wants us to organize a trail ride for some of the local boys, courtesy of the police department and the ranger service. He has a lot of buddies who work for various parks. He had told me that up front that he headed down the wrong path as a kid until he discovered he loved riding and camping. He wants to do that for kids who might be in the same kind of situation, and I agree. I'll contribute money for a good cause any day, and I'll even lend a horse or two." Trip wiped his brow. "Well, this must be my lucky day." Hadley's voice, tinged with amusement, stopped at their conversation and strolled up, her long brunette hair shining. "There's nothing like two bare-chested cowboys to make a girl's heart flutter." "My bare chest better be the only one making your heart flutter," Trip said with a pretend glower. I take it everyone's gone?" Her gold eyes showed a glimmer of laughter. "Yep, Melody swears that she has more to do than humanly possible. Tate had a couple of sleepy kids to go to get into bed, and Bex has some sort of corporate meeting first thing in the morning." Spence figured the way the two of them were looking at each other, it was his cue to exit stage left. He cleared his throat and put down the log splitter. "I should collect Harley and go too. I'll see the both of you tomorrow night, and thanks for dinner. I'll bring those chairs." He shrugged back into his shirt, whistled for his dog, and a few minutes later he was in his truck heading down the driveway. For the briefest of moments he considered calling Melody, but decided against it, knowing he'd be shot down if he pushed too hard. So he just drove home, and Harley curled up in the passenger seat, and the dog was really worn out. He suspected Harley would sleep well. Somehow he doubted that would be true for him. Okay, well, let's continue on in this great story. Okay, at page 187. Trip met her at the barn and took the reins. "Nice morning. Enjoy the ride?" "Absolutely," she answered. It was indeed a lovely morning, the breeze cool and clean, and the upcoming trail ride just might be what she needed, a break from the current woes, and some time with Spence, not to mention Hadley and Bex. It sounded like a mini vacation. She rubbed Sunset's neck, saying that she was an extremely well-mannered horse. That she is. Like Spence, Trip was calm and relaxed with animals, so they were comfortable with him, and he slipped off the mare's bridle, and she nudged him affectionately. "The minute I saw her, I knew she'd suit Hadley." "Yeah, it was definitely love at first sight." He fended off another affectionate snuzzle. "Speaking of which, how's everything going with Spence?" Faced with a direct question, she felt like she'd been put on the spot, as if she and Trip weren't friends, but he was more in Spence's camp than hers. I don't know," she managed to stammer out underneath his disconcerting gaze. She met it squarely. "I don't know how serious he is, so I'm going to stick with the answer that I just don't know." Trip began to loosen his girth as he spoke. "He'll tell you eventually. That's how he works. It all has to be settled in his mind before he takes a step. That makes him a great cop and a great chief." Melody nodded, then stepped forward, eager to change the subject. "Let me take the saddle so you don't need to coddle me." He deposited it in her arms. "Here you go. It's true, on the trail you'll have to handle yourself and your horse. Put your own tack away." She managed to heave it up onto the post. "It's been a few years, but I hope it's like riding a bicycle, except with legs and an occasional temper. Yeah, I guess horses are unpredictable." "So is Spence," he said with a laugh. "I was talking about him." She blushed. "You're as bad as your wife." "Worse," he winked. She shook her head, playing along, pretending to be shocked. "How does that Hadley put up with you, anyway?" "God knows, I've wondered that myself." She nudged a pile of straw with her toe, not meeting his eyes. "She loves you, and that's how she does it." He hung the bridle on the iron hook. "You don't love Spence?" Loaded question there. "I tried that once. It didn't work out so well." Trip swung around. "Try it again, Mel." "Whatever I tell you, you'll tell him, so I just can't exercise my right to respond." His mouth curved in another grin. "I think you're confusing our little talk with the amendments to the Constitution. I'm asking because he's like my brother. Look at it this way. If you thought I might hurt Hadley, you'd come after me like a rabid Wolverine on steroids, right?" "True, although she'd never seen a Wolverine, rabbit, or otherwise." She left shortly after that conversation, not precisely unnerved, but certainly unsettled. Oh, we're getting to the final paper clips, and then I'm going to leave you to your devices. Will Melody and our wonderful police chief Spence get together, or are they going to be totally at odds and always never going to give each other that second chance? Page 206. "It's your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you." He lived in this town his whole life. The book on Spencer Hogan was wide and open except for one thing. "My mother sent me a card the other day," he said slowly, "just like that, out of the blue, after all these years." "Why?" The fact that he even admitted it surprised him. It wasn't a part of his life he talked about. Melody knew, of course. Everyone did. His mother had dumped him with his Aunt Libby and walked away. None of that was news, of course. She asked him, "What did it say, the card or the letter, or whatever it was?" "Don't know." He looked over at the mountains, peaceful, serene, a timber ridge silhouette against the darkening sky. There were wolves in the darkened ridges, mountain lion, and plenty of bears, and other dangers too, but people know people. Melody stared at him. "Don't know? You haven't opened it, or did you burn it?" He shifted in his chairs. "Burn it? Let's not get dramatic, though. I have admitted it occurred to me to just throw it away. It's in my desk at the office. I'm trying to decide if I want to hear anything she has to say, or I'm leaning towards the not. She didn't go all female on him and tell him what he should open it. Melody sipped her wine and studied the glorious scenery. Harley had it bad, and he'd come out with them and was fast asleep at her feet. He and that dog sure understood each other. He worshipped there, too. I take it my opinion is welcome. I haven't told another person on this planet but you, not even Trip. Feel free. She gave him an unfathomable look. You haven't told Junie? Oh, geez. We work together. We're friends. Have been since childhood. That's the beginning, middle, and end of it. To his relief, Melody seemed to accept that and settled more comfortably against the back of their chair. I honestly don't know what I'd do in your place. Atticus Finch says, well, the Harper does anyway, in How to Kill a Mockingbird. Unless you've walked in another person's skin, you don't know what he's put up with, what he's gone through, and I think it's a valid point, although I'm trying to imagine what would make me abandon my child, and I just can't come up with it. Me neither, Spence sighed and rubbed his jaw, so I can't decide if I should even waste my time reading it. After several minutes of silence, she said the most unexpected thing. It hadn't occurred to me before, but women are sort of like cats. He turned his head to look over at her. Okay. Melody had a quirky smile on her face. I just mean we're so inquisitive. Men are different. They're more like dogs. They take everything at face value and deal with it and move on. There's not a cat on this planet who could leave the envelope on your desk alone. If it was from my mother, who'd been gone since I was 9 years old, I would have torn it right open. Now I see your point. She deserves nothing from you, but I still would have wanted to open it on the spot. I wouldn't have been able to stop myself. Being designated a canine, he said wryly, I thought I might take it over to my aunt and let her look at it, since she's the one who raised me. Maybe she should make the call whether I reply or not. Your aunt is fantastic. She deserves a lot of the credit. She sure did deserve the credit. She welcomed a confused 9-year-old boy into her life, no hesitation. He'd been a handful in high school, too. She'd taken it all in stride. I don't know that's a plea for forgiveness. I just don't know if it's a plea for anything. It's a card, judging by the feel of the envelope. That's it. My birthday's in March. Maybe it got lost in the mail or something. How many has she sent you? Cards? My mother? This would be the first. I kind of want to wipe the floor with her. That muttered comment made him choke on a sip of wine that he'd been drinking all evening. One glass and he still wasn't finished. Apparently he wasn't all that cultured. A squat brown brow was more his style. Or brown bottle, sorry. My eyes are getting tired. Pardon me. Melody wasn't the kind of woman who engaged in brawls. She was artistic and much too sensitive, he said quietly. That impractical and rather improbable sentiment is duly noted and appreciated. However, I'm not 9 years old anymore, and I don't understand her reasons for doing what she did, but I no longer need to. The day I worked that out, I set me free. And she doesn't define me. I do. She nodded slowly, then went back to gazing up at the star-speckled sky. That's a healthy attitude. It's clouding up a little. I heard it's supposed to rain. She was perceptive enough to abandon his least favorite subject. That'll keep the ranchers happy. Are we really talking about the weather? Seems like it. And I'll let you read on to see how that plays out. On page 258 we're reading to our final paper clips, y'all. So you're going to get ready to hear my rating here after we finish page 260. So this is pretty entertaining. On page 258, Hadley elevated her brows. Hey, someone needs to stay positive in this tent of gloom and doom. Besides, it doesn't appear that either one of you or both of you together are capable of taking me out, so it isn't going perfectly. So what? I'm having fun. For one thing, when we do all get to spend time together like this, I miss it. It's like a slumber party we used to have. Okay, Melody had agreed that she had a point there. She rolled over on her stomach. I remember when you used to tell the best stories, so go for it, H. Hadley pondered for a minute. Okay, sure. Got it. Once upon a time, there was this beautiful princess. Bex made a derisive sound. Here's an FYI. I think that one's been done before. Hey, give me a minute. There's this beautiful blonde princess who is incredibly stubborn, and she's in love, madly, with a sexy police chief of a small town in a place that we'll call Wyoming. They're both really independent, and they'll break up and go their separate ways, but he's a hottie, and more important, a good guy, and then they'll hook up again. Melody raised her head so she could look at her friend. You're hilarious. Hottie, I hate to inform you, but I don't remember the Grimm brothers using that kind of language. Well, this isn't a fairy tale. Hadley shrugged as the wind broke off a branch somewhere and the crack startling as it thudded to the ground. This princess is pretty stupid, and she doesn't realize what she has right underneath her nose. Stupid? Oh, that's nice. Melody still had to admit that she'd love to know where this was going. Oh, yeah, everyone wants a stupid princess. She is blonde, Bex the brunette pointed out, enjoying it. Hadley piped up, "Hey, it's my story. Can I finish?" So the princess asked the chief, before he became the chief, to marry her many years before, but he was wise and said no. Wise? Neither of them was ready. I know all about that. A blithe wave. That was certainly true. Hadley's first wedding, had it happened, would have been the mistake of a lifetime. There's a happily ever after, right? This is an inspiring story. I love it so far. Melody tried to keep the cynicism down to a minimum. I actually remember that day. Thanks for reminding me, though. Okay, she couldn't prevent a little sarcasm after all. And I think the princess should ask him again. Hadley leaned forward. Listen, this is a secret, but I happen to know he bought the diamond that was stolen from her house. He bought it for her. He commissioned that engagement ring, Mel. Despite the shriek of the wind, the tent was suddenly quiet. Hadley, in her pajama pants and tank top, stared at her. I shouldn't spoil it, she said in a low voice, because it is his surprise. But I love you, and I love Spence, and you're just plain meant to be together. I see him look at you. Her eyes were glossy with sentimental tears. It might be a little-known fact, but Mrs. Arbuckle is his godmother. Tripp told me Spence wanted you to design your own ring, but you just didn't know how. He didn't know how to go about it, so he called on her. That explained a lot, but Melody didn't have any idea what to say. She had been waiting for any sign that he was interested in marriage, but of course he just wouldn't say it. And yet he delivered cookies in the rain, fed her cats, taken the kids on a trail ride. All of those things meant more to her than the ring, believe it or not, and she was deeply touched. Some men couldn't say the words. She supposed they expressed them in acts of kindness and generosity instead. Now I'm going to leave you wondering, does Spence and Melody ever get their act together and give each other that second chance to that fairy tale ending? Or do they lead on separate lives and never find out that they are the one for each other? Oh, so many burning questions, and I hope that makes you pick up The Marriage Charm by Linda Lael Miller. And there's a little mystery in the book, too, because there's some break-ins that happen. To find out who's doing those break-ins, though, you got to read the book. So, what does this book get rated? A 10. It's that good. To find out why, you got to read the book. Thank you for staying tuned with me tonight during this book review. Short and sweet and to the point. I hope it drew you in as much as it drew me in through the whole book. Well, I got to get rest because I work the next few days. So, God bless. Love y'all. Hope you're staying safe, staying well, keeping your social distance. And most importantly, are you ready for this? Washing your hands. When you can't wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer. Wear your mask when you have to. Don't be one of these, I have to wear my mask. Wear it. Don't be one of those. Let's be smart and not stupid. Okay? God bless.